All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for giving up your evening to us to join us tonight. We're going to start in just a second. We're going to use the chat feature that you can, through the chat, you can make comments so we can make this as interactive as possible. We'd love to hear what you're thinking as we go through the presentation. And you can also ask for technical help that way. We have Nat Aguz here with us from our CYS team, who'll be helping out with some of the tech behind the scenes. And then you can also use the Q&A feature to ask questions for the presentation that we will try to address throughout as time permits. And we're going to pop up here in a second with a icebreaker poll just to kind of see a little bit about how folks are feeling. So how are you feeling about dessert? Is it an every night thing, some nights, or never dessert? What's your dessert philosophy? As we're giving folks a little more time to get in the room. And we're going to have some polls throughout tonight to see how folks are feeling about the material and keep it as interactive as possible. All right, let's see if we have any results on that poll yet. Well, we'll give it another minute or two. We've got more people coming in. Welcome to anyone who's come in the room. We are going to be getting started in just a minute. We've got a quick, funny little poll here just to hear how folks are feeling about dessert. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to having some dinner right after this, so thank you for joining us. All right, Nat, go ahead and see what our dessert results are. We head into getting started here. All right, sometimes. Okay. I like to pretend like it's every night and I just have fruit and tell myself it's dessert. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go to the next slide and get started here. So welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Ellis. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm Executive Director at Sentinel Youth Services. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. This is part of a 4-part webinar series to raise more awareness around restorative justice and healing possibilities. And throughout this presentation, you'll be meeting a couple other members of our team that you'll see on our panel here, Pat and Richard, and then Nat's helping in the background as well. And so they'll each introduce themselves as they come in to help present. And so a little bit about Sentinel Youth Services. We are a community-based diversion. We partner with the justice system in Los Angeles County. We've been doing this work since 1975. We work to keep kids out of the justice system and still bring about meaningful accountability and repair through restorative justice. Our work has been nationally recognized as evidence-based. And we'll be talking through what that means to do diversion and the restorative justice piece in particular, and how that is healing and can actually create safer communities. And again, throughout the presentation, really encourage you to use the chat to interact with your thoughts on things, submit questions through the Q&A that we can really work through during the presentation. And our future topics are going to be on healing through conflict on June 12th. And then September 6th, we'll talk about stronger schools through restorative justice. December 7th, the gift of the apology letter. And Nat's going to put in the chat a link to sign up for our newsletter if you don't get it already, and also opportunities, links to donate to help us expand our work. A little bit about me. I've been doing this work for many years. And I got into a passion for restorative justice. I learned about it in high school, and my family had been impacted by the justice system in two ways. One, through close family members who spent time incarcerated, and also through losing family members to violent crime. And in both cases, our family did not get any healing from the justice process. It only added more stress and trauma on top of what was already being faced. And so when I learned about restorative justice, I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. And got into my first work with CYS in my early 20s for a while, and then came back again about 9 years ago as program director, now executive director. So this really is my favorite thing I've ever done in my career, and really excited to share more of this with you. So let's talk a little bit about who's in the room. So I want to invite you in the chat to add your name, your pronouns if you wish to share that, the city you're calling in from, and what safety means to you. So we can get to know each other a little bit more. So again, your name, pronouns, your city, and what safety means to you. We have a bunch of our volunteers in the room. Thank you so much. I'm going to acknowledge Greg and Martha, longtime volunteers with CYS. Lisa, done work with us for a very long time. Keisha, Ivy, Nelson, more volunteers, thank you. Dorothy, one of our volunteers as well, welcome. And would love to hear, what does safety mean to you? So I see Danielle, one of our board members, says safety means, restorative justice means giving people a chance to learn, grow, and heal. Melody says safety means being able to feel calm and at ease with where you are. Great. Okay, let's go to our next slide and keep bringing in your intros in the chat. All right, so our agenda today is we will be, and we have another poll that's going to pop up for you in a second here, but we're going to go over what is restorative justice for those that may be new to that. Going to talk about how an adversarial system, which is how our justice system is set up right now, actually erodes accountability. We'll talk about the drivers of violence and what works to reduce reoffending, as we're looking at how do we create safer communities. And talk about restorative justice and how that builds empathy in the brain, and then how you can get involved. And as we're looking at this poll on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most confident, how confident are you in your knowledge of restorative justice? And as you're filling that out, I got Ivy says safety means to be protected from danger or injury. Greg says safety means being able to feel freely move about in my community without fear. Dorothy says it means being protected from harm. Altarik from Newark, New Jersey, thanks for joining us, says safety means respect. Tanya from Indianapolis, RJ is a way to help people learn accountability and build relationships. And Stephanie from LA, safety is having our needs met. And Lisa, safety ensures vulnerable people are protected from harm. Great. Dr. Jala, welcome. Good to see you again. Safety means operating without fear of any kind. Okay, let's close the poll and see how we're feeling about our knowledge of restorative justice. All right, we got a lot of folks kind of in the middle there, so wanting to learn more and get deeper with it. And got one person feeling really solid and confident in their knowledge of RJ. And we got one person brand new here to learn from scratch. So perfect. We'll try to make sure there's something for everyone. So I'm going to pass it on at this point to my colleague, Pat Parker.
Thank you for that, Jessica. So we'll be talking about restorative justice, the fact that we know that it works. Shortly, we're going to take a look at a video, but I'm going to present a couple of questions to you as you watch the video. Consider what happened, who was affected and how can the harm be repaired? So as you watch this video, think about those three questions and we'll come back and have another conversation about it. Thank you. While she's queuing up, there we go.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police in the first place. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive. It doesn't require people to act, to think. It certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility, to repair things as much as possible, and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry, it's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism, up to addressing the impact of murders on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. To say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Crime survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would have the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, an inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prisons to try and keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
Again, my name is Pat Parker, and I'm the lead for schools and community partnerships with CYS. Welcome to those of you that are just joining us. What we were looking at is the essential elements of restorative justice. and there are questions. What happened? Who was affected and how can the harms be repaired? Now, the video that we just saw, it does a great job of explaining the restorative justice process as a practice, as an alternative to the criminal justice system. But what it does not do is address the disparities, race, sexuality, class, and mental disability. These things consistently exist in the juvenile justice system, or the fact of how restorative justice addresses this. This is something that CYS keeps at its forefront, the forefront of what we do. In order to keep racial equity at the forefront, we use data. Data shows that youth of color and white youth are exhibiting similar behaviors, but youth of color, specifically Black youth, are getting arrested at a much higher rate. In other words, data shows that when a white kid and a Black kid both spray paint a wall, the Black kid is getting arrested most often than the white kid. For now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Richard Deleon, the Program Manager for CYS.
Thank you, Pat. So I'll be going over the differences between the retributive justice system, which is our traditional court system, and our restorative justice system approach. So one of the main differences is the way crime is seen. It's really seen as a violation of rules and laws. Somebody broke a crime and somebody needs to be looking.
Richard, we're losing your audio.
You guys hear me? I'll try that again. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, apologize. Okay, I'll start over. So we're looking at the retributive justice system, which is our traditional court system. Justice.
Oh, we're losing you again. It's like as you get going, we're losing you.
I'm not sure if there's anything I could do on my end.
You could try turning off your video. Of course, we'd love to see you presenting, but that might help it a little bit.
Okay, I'll go ahead and try that out. Just cut me off if you guys can't hear me.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, we're basically going over the differences between our retributive justice system, which is our traditional court system, versus our restorative justice system approach. So with the retributive justice system, we're really looking at that. It's really looking at.
Yeah, sorry, Richard, we're losing you. I'm gonna pick up where you left off. So in our current system, while they're looking at a crime as a violation of rules, and they're looking at guilt or innocence, and the authorities impose punishment, with restorative justice, it's a paradigm shift and it looks at things differently. Crime is, instead of just looked at a violation against the state and the state's rules, it's looking at a harm to people or society. And so instead of guilt or innocence, we're looking at whose obligations are these to repair that harm. And it empowers the decision-making and of those who were most impacted. So rather than having attorneys and judges make the decision for folks, it really is empowering the person who caused harm and the person who was harmed to decide for themselves what is going to be the best way to resolve this to move forward. Additionally, within restorative justice, look at the underlying needs of the person who caused harm and what can be done to address those needs so that they're less likely to reoffend in the future. Great, I'm gonna go next. Richard, do we think your audio is still not working?
I can give it a try.
Okay, try it.
Okay, you guys stop me if.
Will do.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we heard nothing. Good.
Okay.
Okay, no worries. I gotcha. I'll jump in.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. The other big difference between restorative justice and our current justice system is within restorative justice, we can really do more to meet the needs of harmed parties and crime victims. So in the current justice system, appointments, the court dates are just set and you have no choice. And so if you're a crime victim, not only did this crime happen that harmed you or really seriously inconvenienced you, caused you damages, etc. Now the court just picks a date. You might have to take time off work to go attend court. The location of the appointments, there's very few court buildings, so you might have to be driving to downtown LA through a ton of traffic to get there. Within our juvenile justice system, often the crime victim is not allowed into the process. So often they're just sitting in the DA's office in a room on a hard plastic chair, sort of waiting to be essentially used as more of a witness than they are. Whereas in restorative justice, they have a full say in the process. There's agreement on what's a date and time and location that's convenient for everybody. So folks aren't having to take time off work. And the crime victim gets to maintain being a part of the process throughout. And the restitution completion rates are much higher. We really have a misnomer that our justice system is bringing about accountability. We think, oh, people go to court, they're ordered to pay restitution. The restitution collection rates are dismal. It's really, really kind of a joke in California how few restitution is actually paid or collected or ever makes it to the crime victim. And in this process, emotional repair can be obtained as well within restorative justice. Whereas in the justice system, it's really just the madder you are, the more money you ask for. There's really nothing, you don't get an apology. There's no other way to get through the emotional piece of the crime. And within our process, the satisfaction rate is much higher. Victim satisfaction rate is 90% in our restorative justice process. So moving on to also how our, next slide, how our current system, adversarial system erodes accountability. So in the justice system, well, before I get into that, I'm going to throw up another poll to kind of see where folks are thinking of. Can you think of a time that you or a youth you know could have been diverted from court instead of meeting punitive repercussions of a detention or a suspension or an arrest? There may have, where restorative justice or some alternate solution might have been helpful. So just wondering if you can think of a time for that. And while you're thinking about that, so in our current court system, basically your attorney always tells you, don't admit, don't apologize. Your car insurance company will tell that. If you hit somebody, they tell you, don't apologize, don't admit anything. And so that's really eroding accountability. And the system is really not about finding the whole truth or finding real repair and restitution. It's really a win-lose strategy. Who can win the case the most? And that's not creating meaningful accountability. You have also within our system deep socioeconomic disparities in access and treatment. So one of the things that wealthier families also have their kids get arrested for serious things sometimes. What happens is they can get an attorney into that process right away and get advice even before talking to police, etc. They can, if you can afford it, you can get your kids into treatment right away, and then that's gives them a lot of preference points in the court system. Oh, they're already in treatment, great. So study upon study has found that folks with lower income access have a much higher conviction rate, even when all other factors are the same. Crime type is the same. There's higher conviction rates the lower your income level, because there's really baked in privilege for anybody with access and money, and that's not a fair and just system. Also, jail severs relationships. And if you're in jail and have to can't afford bail, by not even being able to afford bail, that also leads to higher conviction rates for reasons we don't have time to get into here. And same thing in our schools. We see also real disproportionality in schools in terms of communities with access, see lower rates of expulsions and more usage of counseling as a solution. So moving on to a piece, I want to really bring out a piece that was addressed in the video, that within our justice system, we bake in the actual drivers of violence are baked into our justice system. Shame, you have something on your record that keeps you from being able to get certain jobs. And all the things associated with having spent time in prison or having a conviction. You have economic situations, so being ordered to pay not just restitution, but our courts also add fines and fees on top of that that go to the courts and help feed those large bureaucracies. And often they will collect their fines and fees long before they collect restitution for the crime victim. And then within our detention settings, including juvenile detention settings, many kids report staff getting the kids to fight with each other, setting up adversarial situations. They are dangerous institutions. And all of that is going to increase violence. When you subject a kid to having to fight for their survival, then when they come out of that detention facility, they're still in that mode. So we have not created community safety when we detain kids for crimes. There's better ways that we can address that behavior and make sure that we're really creating public safety. And again, you can submit any questions into the Q&A at any point. And we can move to the next slide. So if the drivers of violence are baked into our detention settings, then what does work to create more public safety? Well, a lot of research has been done on this and has found that things that are the common go-tos for our justice system, like scared straight programs, any kind of deterrence, boot camps, even court and probation supervision, either have no reduction in recidivism or they actually increase recidivism. Recidivism meaning your likelihood to reoffend. What does work to drop recidivism significantly is good education, strong education programs that help young people graduate from high school meaningfully, counseling and therapy, case management that's addressing the underlying causes, and restorative justice. And when we combine those things with restorative justice, bringing the meaningful accountability and therapeutic interventions where needed, that can really create the highest rates of success and lack of recidivism, and therefore higher public safety. Next slide. Oh, did we, and we're going to throw up another poll. From what you see in the media, do you believe that youth crime is increasing or decreasing? So, and while you're thinking about that, we're going to reveal the answer in a minute. Up on this slide, we have scans of the brain. The top half are the two halves of the adult brain. This is the brain on impulse control. So I like to joke that this is the part of your brain that lights up when you want to tell off your boss, but you want to keep your job. So these parts of your brain help you think ahead to the consequences and go, maybe I can, rephrase that. The bottom half is the two halves of a 12-year-old brain on impulse control. You can barely see it on the screen. There's 3 teeny little dots. And they just don't have as much to work with yet. their brain is still developing. Our brains, and in terms of these kinds of executive functions, aren't fully developed until age 25. And so when a 12, 14-year-old makes really bad decisions and harms somebody, often folks are saying, well, what were you thinking? They weren't. They didn't have as much to work with in terms of thinking through the consequences. But the good news is the brain has room for change, growth, regeneration. When we have trauma, that further erodes our ability for impulse control and empathy. But that can be rebuilt with treatment and through relationships. The biggest thing that builds for kids impulse control ability and empathy is relationships. And so when we use consequences that sever relationships, we suspend them, kick them out of school for a couple of days, we expel them out of their school community, we lock them up in detention centers. These are things that sever relationships. These are exactly the things that further erode the abilities for impulse control. And so what we want through restorative justice is to repair relationships because that is going to build the empathy centers of the brain and increase our ability for impulse control. So let's look at the results from our poll here. What do folks think? From looking at the media, do we think youth crime is on the rise? 86% feel like it is on the rise. So let's go to our next slide. Yes, that is definitely the impression that is given. So here is actual data. Youth crime has been on a decline for 20 years, a very steady decline. And that has continued through the pandemic. 2020 and 2021 both showed continued decline. So this is from State Department of Justice data that they collect from all of the counties and their probation departments that are managing youth crime stats. And so it's really important that we think about what messages we're getting from the media and how that's driving how we vote around criminal justice issues and what we're asking of our elected officials. So definitely something to think about. So youth crime is down. And the more that we expand these kinds of restorative practices into our system, as they have been expanding and diversion has been expanding over the last few years, that we can continue to bring those numbers down with smarter responses to youth behavior. I'm just gonna pause for a second, Nat. If I haven't been able to watch the chat or the Q&A, if there's anything you want to throw at me. What resources do we have for youth in our program that are identified or diagnosed with adverse childhood experiences? So for folks who haven't heard of ACEs, there's an incredible groundbreaking study done by Kaiser. You can look it up under adverse childhood experiences that has led to a lot of subsequent research looking at when folks have had adverse childhood experiences, how that leads to long-term over the lifespan of health disparities. So one of the things that we can do with our kids and families is kind of screen for adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And a great example is our program used to send kids who are using marijuana to drug treatment programs. And what we found was kids would come back using something worse. Because teenagers are really peer oriented. And so they're in a way contagious to each other. When we shifted and instead, when we saw that there was marijuana use, instead we started looking for trauma and treating the trauma and sort of ignoring the marijuana for the most part, what we found was usage either completely dropped off once the trauma was treated, or it really scaled back to just recreational weekend, much more manageable levels, instead of the kids showing up at school high. So drugs are almost always self-medicating. Sometimes it's peer driven, but most of the time it's self-medicating for hard to handle feelings. And the more we give kids the resources to manage those feelings, the healthier we can help them be. So moving on to, while crime comes down, and we see this in schools too, when school districts in California got a lot of pressure from the state to reduce their usages of suspensions and expulsions. And we see this too when arrests come down. What happens is disparities get worse because we haven't really solved the systemic racism issues that are endemic in a lot of our systems. So when school suspensions come down, the percentage of kids who are suspended who are Black gets worse, goes up. And it's not that the kids are acting any differently. What happens typically is when there are other alternatives like counseling and restorative practices, et cetera, those may get used more often for some kids, and then some kids are still looked at, but this kid is too serious and needs to get arrested. And bias can really come into play in those decisions. And so here's some data from the Los Angeles Police Department. So in 2010, over 19,000 kids were arrested in 2010. In 2019, only 2,600 kids were arrested citywide. So huge drops in crime and in arrests. So there's also, during this time, diversion is coming into play and being used more often, and youth crime is coming down. But as you can see, so Black youth, or kind of that second blue, are only about 8% of the Los Angeles city population. And in 2010, they were about 17% of arrests. But by 2019, they were 32% of arrests, almost 33. There's no evidence that their crime is all that different, but there's been some good, strong evidence and studies around over-policing in certain neighborhoods. We also see this in certain school districts, where we'll see police responses in some areas and more likely counseling kinds of responses in other areas. Often it's similar crimes. So like, we had a kid arrested for spray painting shaving cream on the grass. It literally dried up. There was no permanent damage. Arrested for that. There are all kinds of communities that would never tolerate arresting their kid for something so minor. We had one school district, a kid was accused of sexual assault. He was twerking at the school dance. So we're not talking about huge disparities of kids doing wildly different things. There's some of that because trauma can impact behaviors, but there's also clear over-policing and over-punitive responses for some kids. Okay, so with diversion, I'm gonna go to the next slide. First of all, simply being arrested, even if that charge is, there's no conviction, for my attorneys in the room who know that kids don't get convictions, not sustained in court. A simple arrest, even without ever seeing the inside of a courtroom, studies have shown these kids to be 7 times more likely to experience adult unemployment welfare dependence. The arrest itself creates a harm. And while we don't exactly know why that is from the science, we're seeing that very clearly in the data. And so what we're doing at CYS with diversion is we're interrupting the arrest itself. So we work with law enforcement partners, Los Angeles Police Department, LA County Sheriff's Department, and many others to interrupt the arrest process. We work with them to get the young person, the booking is not completed. There is officially no arrest on record, and they're diverted into our program for restorative justice and community-based solutions. And we can work with the crime victim at that point and resolve everything outside of that process. And when we're complete, the kid's case is closed with law enforcement with no arrest, and they can legally say they were not arrested. We're now doing this with a range of nonviolent felonies as well, and it's showing dramatic results in lower recidivism compared to kids going through the justice system and much higher victim satisfaction. Next slide. And research studies indicate diversion programs rooted in restorative justice are among the most effective at increasing public safety. CYS is diverting about 600 kids a year at this point. Next slide. And while we divert kids at multiple points in the system, so we can intervene, we have relationships with public defenders and the district attorney's office here in LA County and have for 20 years, where we can divert kids that are already in the court process and interrupt the conviction process or the petition. And that's some of our work. We can get even lower recidivism rates if we can intervene earlier because of that. This just being in the system creates a harm. So the bulk of our work now is pre-arrest, and this is substantiated nationally by research. So this is some national research cited down the bottom of a meta-analysis. So nationally, looking at pre-arrest diversion cuts recidivism by 20 to 30% versus when kids are justice system involved. So it's much more effective to catch it sooner. And just like anybody raising a 2-year-old, your 2-year-old goes to do something and you want to correct that behavior. You can't wait 2 weeks to correct that behavior. It's not going to connect. Same thing with teenagers. So our system moves slowly. So putting a kid on probation, that's going to happen 6 weeks after the offense at best, often months later. Kids don't even connect it anymore. Like, why are you doing this? Community service. The man made me do it. Don't even connect it. So by getting in there with services sooner, we can intervene and get the behavior back on track sooner. Turn it over back to Pat.
Thank you. So this next slide shows what the center of CYS's justice diversion model is. Ownership, taking responsibility for one's actions, how going through this process allows our young people to own what has happened. Empathy, the ability to identify with compassion what has happened for all of those that are involved, and reparation, the ability to repair the harm. And let's go to the next slide. So when we talk about those things, we're not just talking about a minor infraction. It's being able also to connect services that might help the entire family unit as they are involved in this process. This slide is about creating a safe space in mediation. Mediation is a safe space. It allows choice, for the ability to make the decision about participation, empathy, again, being able to identify with compassion the circumstances, agency, the individual being able to determine the outcomes, what they want the outcomes to be able to go towards the outcome, to engage in an expectation of a good outcome, and fairness. Fairness being that everyone is treated without preference, and that the mediator is present to be able to hear and understand and not take sides. And so with this, it's about how both parties can maintain the choice to participate, to continue or to discontinue in the matter, not being ordered to do something. Most times when kids are told what to do, they're directed, they can become very resistant. And so at all times during the mediation process, they understand that they have the power of choice. The youth begins to learn empathy, hearing what the other person, the harmed party, is saying. Oftentimes, as Jessica was talking about, in the traditional justice system, that while there is sentencing that goes on, the satisfaction and the fulfillment of being able to hear what has happened for the party that has been harmed, and then allowing the young person that is caused to harm to understand what has happened and the impact that has been caused. Creating really genuine empathy in the young person, which winds up happening is that they don't recidivate. They are less likely to commit that crime again, because now they understand that they are not islands unto themselves. And so I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
I can try to jump in one more time, see if my audio works. It's going good so far? Okay, perfect. So this is actually one of the restitution items that was agreed upon by our referred youth and party. And so this is a painting that was created by our referred youth and a quote that came with it. The rainbow of vibrant colors represents the day and how it was going until you see the black brushstrokes. The black represents the pain, agony, anger, and emptiness of where that day went wrong and how it went wrong. I have learned what to do next time something similar like this happens. I have learned that I can just simply walk away and process the situation myself or with somebody that I actually trust. One of the great things about this quote is it not only is the youth taking accountability for the actions that they of the crime that they had committed, but they're also knowing how to handle this in future situations. They've learned from their mistakes and they're able to adapt so that if a similar situation comes up, they actually will respond in a different manner. And then if we go to the next slide, we have another beautiful painting from one of our referred youth as well. And this youth said, I made this art piece in hopes of allowing the viewer to have an imaginary space of reflection that they can visit in their mind anytime. This piece will hopefully inspire young people like me to really reflect on their actions and to work to become a better part of society. Personally, the color green represents growth in many ways. You got this, so take a deep breath, keep moving forward on your path of becoming the best you can be. So again, really beautiful art and a great reflection of how this youth learned from their mistakes, but also is growing from it. Now pass it back over to Jessica.
Great, thanks. All right, so a little bit about restitution. We did a study, there was an external study funded by the court system in California to look at kids going through our program versus kids going through the normal justice process, aligned on demographics, crime types. We're all similar, so it was a strong comparison study, and found that our kids were completing their community service hours at 6 times the rate than if it was court or probation ordered. And the reason behind that is that empathy building and connection. So when we would ask kids who were ordered to do community service by probation or the courts, we would ask them, why are you doing community service? It's really funny. You get some version of first the classic teenage eye roll, and then the man made me do it. They don't even connect it to the crime half the time. It just feels like something that's been imposed upon them. With our kids, when we ask them, why are they doing community service? It's a completely different answer because we got there in a completely different path. They weren't ordered to do it. They came, they met with the person that they harmed through their actions. We built empathy together, made a connection, and then we asked the kid, what do you want to do to make things right? And so they had agency in the process. So often they offered it up, or they offered something else up, and then the victim said, no, that's not enough, or whatever, and we negotiated, and they had a say in that process. We got there completely differently. So when we ask our kids, why are you doing community service? The answer is some version of, well, because I messed up Mr. Smith's store and that's how he feeds his family, and so I got to make it right. I get it. They made the connection. And that's the key. Community service doesn't make somebody stop committing crimes. It's that connection of empathy and understanding that my actions hurt other people, and starting to learn to care about myself and then care about my impact on others. That's what creates lowered recidivism. The other thing is monetary restitution. Our kids were paying money back at 166 times the rate. And we were like, what? What does that mean? Because our kids weren't paying that much. Because once we built empathy, the victims' demands for money came way down and got much more realistic than they are in the court system. We would have victims say, okay, I can see this is a single mom with 3 boys on her own. Okay, forget it. I don't need money. How about blah, blah, blah. So our agreements get a lot more realistic and more doable. So they're completed. Versus the court system was not only ordering restitution, they were ordering fines and fees on top of that. And they were withholding driver's licenses when people couldn't pay it, which meant now they couldn't get a job. So it was a perpetual locking folks into poverty situation. And then that was leading to really low rates of payment. And the restitution is not only monetary or community service. We get all kinds of creative reflections like the ones that Richard just shared. We get the harmed party sometimes saying to the kid, hey, we're from the same culture. Our people don't do this. And I want you to learn about our culture, and really kind of connecting in that way, which is really meaningful. Okay, moving on. So our outcomes through doing this. Youth who complete all services in full is 75%. We get another about 11 to 14% that complete partially, and the only reason they couldn't complete fully were factors outside of their control. So it's a small number of kids that really failed diversion. And often that's due to other lack of supports in their life from the adults in their life. So the more we can surround kids with more support and surround families with supports that help keep them out of poverty, we can get that number much higher. The restorative justice process is resulting in an agreement with both parties agreeing is 99%. Restorative justice agreements completed in full, so restitution agreements completed in full, 86%, and another percentage partially completed. So again, it's a small number that just really are not completed. Victim satisfaction we've talked about. The youth reporting the process as fair and equitable is 96%, and that says a lot as well. We have this idea in our society that you only get a good agreement if one party's unhappy or they're both unhappy. We don't have that. We don't have to settle for that. We can have both parties actually happy with the result. And huge cost effectiveness for anybody in the room who cares about your tax dollars. This process for diversion, these numbers probably need to be a little bit updated, but like $4,200 to $6,400 max cost per case. Whereas right now, our probation department has a budget of $1 million per kid in lockup. That is not money well spent right now. Okay, so looking at a direct recidivism comparison in our next slide, we have, so this is LA County data obtained from the DA's office and from probation reports. The top line, kids that spend time incarcerated in LA County have been prosecuted in court have a 66% recidivism rate. That is not public safety. This is not working. And for kids put on more informal probation, it ranges, or not detained, ranges from 23 to 33% recidivism. That's basically no better than doing nothing. So with a first-time offender, if you do nothing, you get about a 30% recidivism rate. And then our programming for our moderate to higher risk kids who many of them would have seen detention, or they at least would have been put on formal probation, would have been prosecuted in most cases. They're at an 11% recidivism rate, and this has been holding for 10 years. 10 years worth of data. It's been hovering right in this rate. And our low risk kids who are really being over policed for things that could have gone to counseling are really down in the 8%, less than 10% range. And our final poll. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most confident, how do you feel about your knowledge of RJ at this point? Just kind of checking in on how we're doing. Take some questions as well. So pop that answer in there real quick, and we're going to go to the next slide in terms of how you can get involved. And we'll check the chat for any questions we may have missed. And also you can share with us in the chat, has anyone thought of specific routes they're going to take to either get more involved or help spread the word about restorative justice? Okay, a bunch of questions in the Q&A. Nat is telling me, let's check them out. Trying to keep up here. So many screens. Okay. Michelle asked, do you have resources for young people with developmental or intellectual challenges? Yes, and we've done some adaptations to the restorative justice process. Sometimes as needed. We had one young person with autism who really couldn't communicate his feelings verbally. So we did a written back and forth between him and the harm party. So we partner with other organizations for a lot of things. We have a lot of partners that help us out with kids who are gang involved, kids in foster care, kids with developmental challenges. So yes, we can partner up and make sure that we get the resources that they need. And then we've got Stephanie. I'm interested in learning about which children are eligible for CYS mediation. So we have, for young people that are eligible for our diversion work in particular, mediation is pretty wide open. So as long as the kid can negotiate for themselves. So like in our family mediation program, we had a 7-year-old one time, and this kid was very verbal and knew exactly what his terms and what he wanted. This is a little future attorney. His mom had her on hand, and we had the 5-year-old in our waiting room who's clearly going to be next. Really just precocious, smart kids. And the 7-year-old held his own in mediation. Usually that's a little young, but as long as the child can communicate their needs and then we can do mediation. And our restorative justice mediations don't have to be tied to the justice system. So schools refer to us all the time. Dr. Ajala on the call from the Compton School District refers kids in lieu of calling police or in lieu of suspensions and expulsions. We really want to acknowledge them for a lot of great work they've done there with us. And but then we also have kids for diversion. And so that means that they've committed a crime under the penal code. They have to be under 18 at the time of the crime. So it's because we only have a license to operate in the juvenile justice system. And the crimes can be any misdemeanor and most felonies, but not the violent class of felonies. So not murder, rape, kidnapping, but we do quite a wide range of, we do felony assaults, we do felony thefts, we do sexual battery. So not all of those may be appropriate for mediation and restorative justice at all times, but we do other work within diversion. Okay, and then curious how the DA or other state players are involved or not involved in the process. So we have a consensus building process with our justice partners. And so a committee of judges and the DA's office and probation and the law enforcement and the public defenders and civil rights attorneys all together that we work to get their consensus at every step of the way with our program, and they have agreed to be hands off. That once they send us a kid, we agree on referral criteria, then they send them to us and they are hands off. We are not giving them any information other than the kid completed successfully or not. So we're not telling them what the kids are doing or their diagnoses or any of their business. And then we report back our statistics on recidivism and victim satisfaction and kid satisfaction. And that's been very successful to really transform our system. And in LA County, there's now a county-wide effort replicating our work. So we created a model, got the data to prove that it works. And so LA County is now really expanding diversion across the county. So ways to get involved. You can volunteer. We could use folks who are good writers or speakers to help spread the word. If you have groups that you want to help get the word out to expand knowledge around restorative justice. And you can sign up for our newsletter. You can donate and put a donate link in here. And we'd love for you to complete a survey for us to let us know what you thought of today. So Nat's going to put that in the chat. And also you can call your legislative representatives and ask for more restorative justice options to be built into our penal code. We're starting some real legislative advocacy to start to transform the penal code to take RJ out of the margins and really start to embed it into our practices for more community-based solutions when we hurt each other and to do repair. Great. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate you. We can go to our final slide and hope that you will join us for our future next session, June 12th, Healing Through Conflict. Great new panel. You can meet all kinds of other different people, partners and other volunteers with us. Alicia Dunham's one of our longtime volunteers who has written a book on having conversations with your enemies. It's a really great book on conflict resolution. So would love to see you join us there. We're going to wrap it up here. We can stick around for a few minutes if anybody else has burning questions they want to ask. And how can we get more buy-in from system partners? Well, if you can stick around, Yaneli, I'm happy to help answer that. And if anybody else needs to drop off, feel free. Wishing you a great evening. And please do fill out our survey so we can do better on these in the future and get you what you are looking for. Okay, Yaneli, let's see. What kinds of community service are you participating in? Is it traditional? We can get really creative with it. We had a kid destroyed the plants in the neighbor's yard, and so we planted new plants for her. We try to make it as community-based as we can. These days, with everybody worried about liability, that gets a little challenging. But we really try to be creative and make sure it's doable for the kid and the family. We're not doing traditional court-ordered community service things where people have to pay a fee just to do it. We try to avoid that kind of stuff where we can, or we might cover the fee. Getting more buy-in from system partners. I think the big thing we do there is we set aside our social worker talk about trauma, et cetera, which is important, but we're going to get to that later. We got to meet our system partners where they're at. So typically they're more concerned with public safety and accountability. So we kind of start there with the conversation. We talk about how we're going to achieve that. And over time, we build their understanding of youth development, the teen brain, and trauma and equity and the disparities in our systems. We get to that, but if we start out the gate with some of that stuff, they just cut it off. So really the data helps drive the conversation. So we look at, okay, if we're all concerned about public safety, why did we have a 66% recidivism rate for every kid that we file on in court? That's not working. That's not public safety. So let's talk about what we can do to bring that down. And so we get our recidivism data. We've been able to partner with probation and get their help in pulling our data so that we can prove that what we're doing is working. And that really our recidivism data, even though there's all kinds of debates about recidivism data and whether or not it's valuable, it's not necessarily a valuable measure of the individual and whether or not they're progressing, but as a test of our organizational impact, we think it is valuable, and it's really valuable for getting that system buy-in. All righty, did I miss anything? That's it. Thank you, everybody. Oh, get everybody hung on. Okay. I love it. Did I miss anything else in the chat anybody wants? Melody pointed the survey link did not work. Okay, thank you, Melody. That's why we trapped you all here. You're waiting for your correct survey link. Thank you so much. Place where we can find out more about legislative work. Yes, our newsletter. Creating up, providing updates there. We have a bill that's, we're part of establishing a new California Restorative Justice Policy Coalition, and we have a bill that's about to pass. Already passed the Assembly, on its way to the Senate, looking good. That's just a small bill, just to kind of start testing the waters. That's just a notification bill. It'll say that that crime victims need to be notified if there's a restorative justice options in their area, just as a starting point. And then we'll be building from there. All righty. Thank you,
There's
everybody.
a question about volunteer trainings.
Richard, take it away.
Yes, I can drop my email, and if you send me an email, we can definitely get you in as a surrogate victim. We have those trainings a little bit more frequently than our mediator volunteer work, but yeah, I'll drop my email.
All righty. Well, wishing everybody a good dinner and a good evening. I'm starving. I'm looking forward to my fruit dessert. My neighbors brought over a bunch of kumquats. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.